I wouldn't even want to think about it for 2 years. I don't want that on the books.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm excited to start writing the next thing.
Yeah.
For all intents and purposes, the poem I was writing is done, and though there may have been edits to it since, I'm not sure.
This Leviathan.
Yeah, which went from, I'm not sure if I told you this, but went from basically a really sort of, well, you saw it,
Yeah.
billowing.
I did, yes.
billowing expression. Very full.
Yeah.
It was very full and very satisfying to do. And then I went through this process with Jade of heavily distilling it into, now it is a poem.
Okay.
It is a poem.
Very good.
And she had a whole, like, I haven't talked to her about this yet, but I feel like her name should be on it, like Ade Porter and Jada, because of how heavily she didn't write anything, but she edited and phrased the thing in a big way, and yeah, we went through this whole process, and then at one point she had like had a dream about the moment we were in and about what needed to happen with the poem, and then she like had the moment while we were editing, and I just sat by while it was happening, and her eyes rolled back in her head a little bit.
That's good.
And then out of that came like basically what you'll end up seeing.
Okay.
And it's very good and
cool.
Very distilled and to a very specific essence. There are parts of it that just got folded into it kind of spiritually.
That's good. Sounds like it's a lot more concentrated in a way.
It's a poem now.
Yeah.
Yeah, before it was something else.
Right. Yeah.
Before it was a great start.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really good. It's really good, and
Good.
And
it's very satisfying.
And in a lot of ways is a kind of jewel of this whole Beauty and the Beast thing, in that it is like Beauty having guided the Beast. Like it is it is that process, like incarnate.
Okay.
And then the story itself is that, but flipped. Like the Beast is what makes Beauty, and it's this. It's kind of it's somewhat of this. From what I can tell, it's kind of the soul. It seems like it might be the soul of the thing, or representative of it. So it's cool, and it was really, it was satisfying to make, but also unsatisfying in a way of like I want to also write more, and in the part of making it a good poem involved taking out cutting some parts that just weren't essential to that poem, but are essential to my experience.
Yes, right.
And now I'm like, oh, this is why you have to keep writing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
and
Well, good.
I welcome that, because it's more fuel to develop a writing practice, and yeah, so
That's very good.
more to come.
Yes.
More to come.
Mm-hmm.
Excited
Well, good.
for our new writing phase.
Right. Right. Yeah.
I think that'll be
And
good.
gives you some experience of working with an editor,
Yeah.
which is useful for any writer, because to get anywhere, you're going to have to deal with an editor.
Yeah.
one
Whether
way
that's
or
you
another.
or someone else.
Right. Somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the problem with a lot of the stuff I read now online, because anybody can put anything up there.
Oh, there are.
Just all kind of
There's
dribble.
no gatekeepers, which often
Right.
also translates to there's no one editing
Right.
or proofreading.
Right. Just
Yeah.
proofreading. We'll start with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, editing, I'm going kind of like cultural level with it.
That's fine.
Like, we're in such a free expression, seemingly. Like, we're under the guise of free expression if it's within these contexts of,
Right.
if it's within this range, it's just, we congratulate you and encourage you to be free. And this time of rebelling against patriarchy, just trying to express myself. It makes sense that we're also in this time of you can just post it on your blog, and
Right.
you can just post it on YouTube, and I think that's beautiful. That ability is amazing, and I think it
Yes, it
should
is.
I think that democratization of the mediums is very,
That's good.
it's
Right.
good. It's good. But the lack of an editor, or the seeing, equating the editor basically with the patriarchy
Right.
and structure
Right.
and standards and quality.
These are not bad things. Right.
As if they were, and because and a common artist error, which I've had that too, of has been that structure, that criticism, even constructive criticism, is antithetical or antagonistic to creativity.
Right.
Cramps on it. But it's an essential part of making anything.
Pretty much. Yeah.
But I think, I can say something a little more personal there, not get too off in the abstract. When it comes to my own resistances towards like editing and editing myself, and just lack of knowledge about like how to structure things. Like a part of that has been, and I imagine this is the case for a lot of people, that it's just a lack of understanding of what's actually going on in the editing process. Like, most people encounter the conclusions of an editing process,
Right.
but they don't encounter the thought process that's going on.
True.
And so when it comes out, it just, and this has been my experience when I like have encountered edits on my work, it just comes out as like a conclusion that, without knowing the thought process behind it, like younger self has at times been like, oh, I guess I should have known that, and I'm just a dummy.
I see, yeah.
And either that's the conclusion or fuck you.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Or some mix of both. And I imagine that's the case for a lot of people. Most people don't actually know what's going on in the editing process.
No.
And so it's this mysterious thing that they don't understand, that's also kind of a boogeyman because they don't understand it, and it garners this like...
Right, and there's somebody who seems to disapprove of what you've done and wants to change it.
Yeah, that's right. Right, because if you don't understand the process, and all you get is the result, that is basically the communication that can happen to like a young mind. It's like, oh, you just don't like what I did, and either something's wrong with you or something's wrong with me.
Right. Yeah, but somebody must be wrong.
Yeah,
in
that's
this.
right. That becomes the only conclusion.
Right.
And so that's something that's kind of felt like a really important like insight recently.
It is.
About it.
Yeah.
And help. It's like, illuminated some important things in my own life.
Yeah. And I've lately started doing some editing with my students. Because whereas generally what they write, either in class or as homework, they read aloud in class. And most of the time I never see the paper.
Right, you've mainly just been, classes have been just focused on producing.
Yes.
Because that's like all you have time for.
Pretty
Sometimes
much.
you don't ever see some of the guys again.
Right. Yeah, we never know. Each class could easily be the last one. It's hard to say. But for this collection I'm trying to do, I don't know, maybe half a dozen guys have actually done a version suitable for editing. And so
cool.
I do, markup and real editing. Something past spelling errors and stuff like that.
Yeah. You're getting into content and
into content and structure and so they mostly, I think, understand. I'm on their side. I just want the thing to be more effective.
Yeah.
More stronger somehow. And that's as you know, useful.
Yeah, and I think it requires, like imagining in the classroom setting, it just requires like more, just way more time and energy
Yes.
to explain why you're doing a thing,
Mm-hmm.
and show your work
Right.
as you're doing something, which is probably why most people don't at all, and teachers don't bother because
No.
they're on a track, and um,
Right.
and sure, there's there's nuance and discernment about some things you just do and teach your students or your kids or whoever how to reflect and figure it out and unpack for themselves.
Right.
Um,
And then, the sizable class, they have to figure it out for themselves because it can take, I mean,
Yeah.
I could,
yeah.
ideally, in a 3-hour class, I would deal with maybe, I could do a dozen guys, give them 15 minutes each. But that means that for 2 hours and 45 minutes, the rest of them wouldn't have anything to do.
Yeah.
They'd just be sitting there while I'm working with that one guy. And that's not going to fly. I've got to cover more than that.
Yeah, hence the art
But,
of teaching.
Yeah. And of course, most teachers are not writers, not in a professional, focused life path kind of way. They're teachers, and especially like in grammar school, they could be teaching half dozen subjects. So
Huh.
they have a much broader responsibility.
Yeah. I'm just thinking like maybe all teachers should be writers.
Well,
Like have like some basic ability in terms of the like processing of thought. Like how
Right.
else are you going to be good at communicating and transmitting information if you don't have your own process of thought really dialed?
Right.
Or the quality of your own process of thought will be reflected in how well you
Mm-hmm.
transmit it or something.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea.
I don't know.
But
Yeah.
a serious writer, I guess they often are teachers, or end up teaching or something. But that's not writing. And if writing is really what you want to do, then the teaching has to take a back seat at some point.
Sure, that maybe what they share is just it's like a clear means of communication. Like they're both very communicative in some way.
Teachers and writers?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Mm-hmm.
They both have something very much to say.
Yes.
Um,
With any luck.
yeah,
It's not
God help
guaranteed.
us.
Yeah. Right.
God willing.
Right.
That's the expression I'm going for here.
All right. So what's that first thing there?
The first, you want to go to the discus?
Um,
It was cross-pollination
Oh,
with musicians,
right.
and specifically as it pertains to the metal / rock world and the jazz world. And that's a thing I could go on if you want.
You first.
You want to go there? Okay. Yeah, okay. So it's a kind of cloud of thought that was born out of watching this Thelonious Monk documentary that I told you about recently. And learning a little bit about the scene in Chicago in the 20s and how essential it was and is in the jazz world to play with lots of people. And in a way, the jazz world, like when you're a player in the jazz world, you're kind of more of an individual. In that, like, so it seems from the outside, it seems like, yeah, you have to be a really competent player and personality to make it anywhere in the jazz scene.
Right.
And be able to hold your own wherever you are, amongst whomever.
Right. Regardless of anybody else around.
Yeah. And so that's just fascinating itself. Like, the individuality of jazz is very real. It's very much about the individuals, but specifically in terms of like cross-pollination, like that's such a huge part of the journey. Is like you get your chops in some sense by all the people you play with. And that's kind of part of how what seasons you, it seems like, or that's at least, that it's inevitable that you will cross-pollinate,
right?
If you're just in it long enough, and so I was encountering that and just like, that's so cool. And then I began to be around more of the jazz kids in my peer group. Most of them are a bit younger than me. I think they all came out of the same year, but there's this like wave of really talented musicians in town that are all definitely of the jazz persuasion, and everybody's playing with everybody it's all the fucking time. and it's very attractive, and so seeing that was really interesting to me, and because it highlighted like some of the differences. There's like an east and west thing going on. That kind of like bifurcation of style between like the jazz world and the rock world.
Right.
And because so in the rock world, in the metal world, it's much more. It's not as much about the individual. Like, amidst having rock stars and frontmen, like, because there's the band, like, although members can change, like, the ideal rock scenario is like the band that is the same members.
Mm-hmm.
It's tribe.
Right. Who function as some kind of unit, more or less.
That function as a unit, yeah, and generally don't spend much time playing with cross-pollinating.
Right.
Bands are kind of a nuclear family of sorts.
Right.
And it's just really interesting, and because that's been my world.
Right.
That's been my whole world, and that's
Yes.
part of why encountering more about the jazz world is so, like, illuminating. It's like, well, it's an entirely different way of doing music. And so I'm kind of jumping around here, but see if I can make a coherent whole at some point of all this. Like, then there's the obvious element of, like, jazz is about improvisation. Like, they use standards, structures that came before.
Yes.
from our forefathers.
Right.
Which that's a whole other conversation. But, like, they mostly will use structures, and then within that improvise. And that's so much of jazz, it seems like. And within that, yeah, so they'll use basic structures, and within the improvisation, it's so much about the individuals present in that session, and how they express their take on that.
Right.
And every time they play it's going to be different. And then in the rock metal world, like, it's more classical in the way of, like, it's way more about how well you can perform the same thing, and how well you can reproduce it.
Right.
And it's kind of industrial in that way. You know? How efficiently and how accurately can you reproduce it? And I don't think that's I don't think that's a coincidence at all. Like, it is part of that industrial Western spirit. Rock, metal, of course. Literally, yeah. The amplification is, like, brought to you by the industrial.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
so is there any, I don't know, cross-pollination or something? Does the jazz world encounter the rock world, say, just in Chico? I mean, I know it doesn't overall, but is there anybody who does both?
not really. Like, there's Chico definitely has probably more of it because of just Chico. And everyone's playing with everyone in some fashion. But the few rock bands, I don't know of many right now, just because I'm not very hip to the scene. But the rock bands, the metal bands that exist, they don't cross-pollinate. Like, occasionally, maybe within the metal scene
Oh,
that happens. And of course, like like touring musicians will
right. Have to.
go in between.
Hmm.
But the structure of the band is something just much like, yeah, it's something that is much more central to the metal world, and part of what that lends itself to is being able to reproduce a thing so well. Having a unit, it's much more about being an engine, being able to be like a reliable
Right.
and consistent engine of a thing, and having the same members, or at least the same members for, a good enough time.
Right.
This really lends itself to that, and
So all this was reflected, say, in your experience with Soren. Because how long was Soren a more or less unit?
Soren was a band from
I mean,
the beginning of it was basically the end of 2012 to near the end of 2014, so like 2-ish years.
okay. It's that long ago. I see, yeah.
Telling me.
Time does fly. So, I mean,
yeah, it's been like, it's been, the fuck is that?
8 years.
8 years.
Yeah. So was was 2014 or 15? Was that when you guys won the Cammy?
That must have been early 2014.
Yeah. Okay.
That's when we were most active, and went down south and went up north, and
yeah.
Yeah, but as far as this goes, no, it was an example of we were a band, like we weren't in our off time playing with anyone else. Like if we're gonna play with each other, because we're building an entity. Whereas jazz musicians, you're more like building up your own chops as an individual.
Right.
And clearly that comes into play in the metal world, because you got to be good. The most skilled players in the world are metal musicians. But you do end up being, it does kind of end up being more about the band, because not everyone's taking solos. You're there to. Well, in a way, maybe one way of saying it, I'm thinking in this moment, is like that world in general is more in service to the song. And jazz is more in service to the expression of the individual or something. Or something like that. And those create different situations. And so it's a really interesting thing for me to chew on, and And as a metal musician who, for my whole life, the idea of jamming with lots of different people is somewhat foreign, because I've been monogamous in many ways. It's a much more polyamorous culture when it comes to jams.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, where there was a time where to make music with anyone, to jam with anyone, let alone make music, was like very strange to me. And that's part of the encountering the strangeness of that is part of why this is so kind of significant, or it indicates part of why it's so significant. And that is just encountering my own desire for more of that jazz world, and seeing that, like, I think, like, spiritually, it would at least help me as a metal musician to have more cross-pollination, to have a little more permeable membrane, and to have more cross-pollination with other musicians, and have that element that still, like, finds its way in terms of, like, focus to the creator and the band. But I'm seeing how, like, they could really benefit each other, and how, like, in the rock and metal world, I think people, like, bands can get stale, and there's such a common thing of them burning out. Whereas, like, jazz musicians, I think they kind of, if I'm not mistaken, they go until they die.
Pretty much. Yeah.
They just go until they drop. And I think there's something to that. I think that, like, because it's so much about the individual, like, it's about your own interest and your own, like, pursuing of that. And
and how different combinations of individuals give you something completely different.
Yeah, which is rejuvenating in a way.
Right. So, I mean, my guess is even the oddest musician, jazz musician, could probably find a niche, and once, you know, their style is kind of established and well known, then anybody who was assembling a group would have an idea of what kind of influence this guy would bring.
Yeah.
You know, or this one, you know, this other player.
Yeah, he's got that kind of stank, and he's got this kind of stank, so I want a little bit of that.
We'll throw these together and see what happens. It might be good. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm engaging that more in my life right now, and I'm making a song with someone, and
You are?
Yeah, it's been a very slow process, but it is. But
that's okay.
But we're making. And might be pretty cool.
Yeah.
Might so far, and that's that. Like I've said, also led to the idea of the jazz nights here. And the jam nights. And so that's one of the things I'm doing in a few weeks, is having the level 1 to this bigger jazz night that I laid out one time to you, of just a jam, inviting people over, no charge or anything, and just invite people and their instruments and probably and just have a hot mess of a time and have a great and yeah, and that's it. Kind of represents the like hippiness in me, like combining like that actually is good with discipline. Like they feed into each other, and this looseness of musicality like feeds into this more Shaolin discipline of musicality, and like they feed into each other, they aid each other, and feed into the long run of really making a fucking engine that can run, burn, clean and efficiently and powerfully and
take
show
you
up
somewhere.
and fucking take us somewhere and be a force that can show up city to city to city and just throw the fuck down and just upon people and feel really good about it.
Sure.
And this is part of thinking about how to make that, how that can be sustainable, how that can be. And then on the other end, so I think maybe last note on this, like rock and metal musicians usually, they write their own music. And which is an interesting thing, like, they write their own music and they come to, like, a band will come together and then be able to perform that piece over and over and over and over. Whereas jazz musicians are playing other people's music most of the time.
Mostly, yeah.
And that's, on the other hand, what I think jazz musicians could use more of, that I see, is write your own music. And then flex those crazy ass skills of yours.
Right.
So I think they could learn a lot from each other. The two gods.
Right. So for the jazz world,
that's a big sweeping statement too, because I don't know really shit about the jazz world, but if I did.
I'm just I want to know if this is what it makes any sense to you. So the jazz musicians, although they're playing somebody else's work, playing somebody else's composition, they are composing themselves on the fly when they get their solo. It's just very ephemeral, and once it's over, and they may never play it like that again. But it was a composition. I mean, that improvisation is.
So that's an interesting question.
It just doesn't have much, unless somebody's recording it. It doesn't have, doesn't have any real legs.
Yeah. Okay. So that you. I see what you're doing. Mike,
that's just one interpretation of.
Yeah. Yeah. My gut reaction, my immediate reaction is like, that's not a composition.
I can't argue with that, right?
And but it makes you think, okay, so what is a composition? If that isn't a composition, what is it? Um, like first thought was like a composition is something that like well, like writing, it involves a process of editing.
Ideally.
Well, I think it has to. I think if
Yeah.
it's going to be considered writing, this gets tricky.
Yeah. So if I give the class a prompt and said this, write about something, or give them a situation and say, what do you think about this? Write about this. They just kind of go,
Yeah.
and it's verbal improvisation. And they have, it's a kind of composition. It's impulsive and unexamined and probably not all that thoughtful,
Yeah.
but I still have to call it writing.
Of course. Yeah. So there's
And some guys think that, and a lot of
you're
people,
still
I think,
engaged in writing and the verb and the action.
right, yeah, and doing
Absolutely.
some kind of, because the class, my classes are called creative writing. And yet, as I explain it to the students, it's not all, it's really composition, verbal composition, because I'd like their skills to be better in any sort of verbal way. I would hope that their speech would improve, that their it's not just poetry and short stories and fiction or essays, or it's also notes to yourself and resumes and letters and text messages.
Yeah.
Anything that
Yeah.
involves words probably deserves some thought.
Yeah.
Just maybe not much, but a little, so that just whatever comes off the top, or rather, because whatever just comes off the top could just be drivel. Sometimes is, which where the editing comes in, but sometimes what comes off the top is all you get to do. But I don't think that should get in the way of taking things seriously. Or, yeah. That's enough about that. I'm going to be quiet now.
You're throwing in the towel.
I think so. Yeah. Somebody's got to do it.
Yeah, I mean, just to throw the seed for some time for myself, there is a curiosity about what to call that. And seems like composition as a word involves that entails writing, or entails the circle of writing and editing and examination and
some kind of record of what's been done.
And reflection. Whereas like writing is kind of its own action that's a part of that process. Something like that. And then like a jazz solo, you could say is writing in the sense of like stream of consciousness. And there is some forethought that can happen. I think maybe, more than with words, because you're kind of, it seems like with physical writing, like you can't get too much ahead of where you are. Where music you can kind of set something in motion with your body and have your mind feeling where you want to go, and you can set things. I imagine you could probably do a bit of that with writing too. I'm less experienced with that, but so there's a little bit maybe more of forethought maybe that can happen within a jazz solo, but I'm not sure I would call it composition, at least in today's definition.
No.
Definition of it.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
But we can.
I can see that.
We can call that.
Right. I mean, it does make a difference when it's written down.
Definitely.
For me.
Definitely.
Then that does change things.
Yeah.
Because it's a fixed form, and it can be changed. But right now, this right here is fixed.
Yeah.
It has its own identity and energy.
Yeah. Okay. So this can kind of takes us in a little direction of just being able to reproduce something.
Right.
Which is clearly the case with a value in the rock world, not jazz world. Like, it's pretty profound as someone like trying to like reproduce something I play, or reproduce anything is like, it is an achievement. that I guess I say that a little bit in kind of response to like the attitude of like of someone who like would be glorifying, speaking on the glory of jazz, of like it never can't be reproduced, just can't be done, and be like, when that's beautiful and like significant, and that's a true statement, but also on the other hand, like, but what can be produced, like that's also like profound.
Yes.
Being able to reproduce something, and also like thinking just musically, I think there are certain. It's its own kind of process to make something that can be reproduced. It becomes
musically.
And I think maybe for everything. To make something that's reproducible, it becomes like subservient to all sorts of different laws or something, like of biology, of physicality, of like nature. Like, in order to keep happening, it's got to work at a lot of different levels. And that's part of why it's, when it is able to keep happening, is like so make something like really true.
And I would guess it would also have to be kind of clearly intelligible to others. In order for them to be able to, they've got to understand it and
Sure, clearly enough
to reproduce it.
or at least clear enough to the people who made it,
Right.
which presupposes that it's clear enough to at least one person,
Right.
which is a
Right. That's an
also an
achievement
achievement, yeah.
in itself. Yeah.
which makes it way more possible that it'll be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so musically, like with a jazz solo, there are portions of a jazz solo where like a human, maybe with time, but a lot of time, without that time, wouldn't be able to even understand what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, part of being able to reproduce something is it's clear to you, you have a grasp on it, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that's part of the power of it. Or certainly, yeah, it's certainly something that I've valued unconsciously. It's that ability to reproduce something and play something well,
Mm-hmm.
and have a grasp on it. And yeah, I don't know if I have anything more to say on that. I think I'm kind of petering out. Probably will do a little more. Okay, I want to ask you maybe last thing. When did you realize you wanted to marry Mom?
I don't. I would have to think about that a little.
You met her on
Because
June 19th,
1990.
1990.
Yeah, I guess it was on Juneteenth.
Right.
I don't know if that was actually on the 19th or the 20th, or it's,
Oh,
in
because
those
it's the
days
day of the...
it was like the third Saturday in the month or something like that.
Okay.
Although I can find out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when I met her, it wasn't, well, let's see. Roy and I were at this Juneteenth celebration in North Minneapolis. And I had not badgered, but I had persuaded him to show me where this was, because I don't know that I had even been to North Minneapolis at that point. I had been in Minnesota for 5 years, but 4 of them had been in St. Paul. I had lived in St. Paul, and most of what I did was in St. Paul. So anyway, Roy and I were just in this big, seems to me it was like a backyard of a church, something like that. And I saw her, at some distance. I think she and Jai had just gotten there. And
He had been invited to the party?
who?
Roy.
It was a community celebration. It wasn't.
And you guys just walked in?
We just walked in.
Okay. I didn't know that part. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a fun...
Yeah, I mean, it would have been like what was that? Was it Founders Day? Or something. There may still be an annual parade in Chico. Do you remember?
Pioneer Day.
Pioneer Day, yeah.
Yeah,
It was like that.
they canceled that.
Yeah. And I saw her, some yards away, and I noticed her. She, yeah. And she kept walking toward us.
Like in one straight line,
it seemed like that. Yeah.
Or she was stopping at
No,
different places.
she didn't stop.
Oh,
And it turned out she was coming over to say hello because she knew Roy.
Ah.
And by the time they said hello and he introduced us, I knew. I mean, if I had a thought, it was, so that's her. I said, here she is. And so it wasn't that I decided to marry her then. I just knew this is important. This is, yeah, this is significant, and nothing is going to be the same after this. So we chatted a little. I helped put Jai up on a big culvert kind of pipe, and it was just back there for no particular reason. And but he was trying to climb up there, he couldn't, so I, did my bit.
Yeah, got to work.
Got to work. I said, okay, this is first. Let's get him up on this pipe, and then we'll see how it goes. If he doesn't break his neck, maybe I'll make some progress. So she and I were talking. I don't know. At this point, I don't know where Roy was. I guess he was still around. I really wasn't paying any attention.
Yeah. Did Roy ever even exist?
Yeah, he's gone now. He's done his job. He's left.
You forget whether, did I actually?
How did I get here? We talked. I think Roy may have said she was an artist as part of his introduction. I'm not sure. But she found out I was an editor at a children's book publisher. She said, "Oh, that's interesting. I would like to illustrate children's books. I'd like to illustrate books." I said, "Well, okay."
Cool.
So we exchanged business cards, and probably the next week, because this was on a Saturday, my guess is the next week she called and we made an appointment. She came down to where I was, and we had a formal interview in the conference room, and she showed me her portfolio, and I said, "I'm going to get you some work."
Yeah.
And I didn't see her this was in June. I didn't see her again until August, when I, in order to see her again, I threw a party. Had a party so I could invite her and see.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so let's see if she shows up. I found out later that after our interview at work, I had put her I had pinned her card on a cork board that was in front of my work space in my office, and she had she had put my card on her night table. But I didn't find this out till, many months later.
Sure.
So I invited her to this made-up party. In fact, I was celebrating, this was the pretext, I was celebrating 40 years of reading. So,
You're like, let's see.
What could I call this? Yeah. So that was probably accurate, So she showed, and and she, I was in it was pretty much a studio. I mean, it was actually one bedroom, but I just used the bedroom for storage. And had made my bed in what should have been the living room, because that's where the fireplace was, So I let her. I gave her my favorite mug for her beverage. I don't know what that was. But we talked. She sat on my bed, and we parted affectionately, and but I didn't see her again for, I don't know, 2 weeks. And we went to a fireworks display on the Mississippi River, right there at Nicollet and the river. And it was really spectacular.
So that was like kind of first date then?
Her coming to the party.
No, the fireworks.
The fireworks were the first date.
That was first date.
Yes, that was the first date.
Cool.
And then, and at the fireworks, I touched her, put my hand on her back, testing the waters, and that was Saturday, and then Monday was Labor Day, and she and Jai and I went to a picnic of sorts on Harriet Island. And that really just sealed the deal. I mean, we were very comfortable.
Yeah.
And Jai and I got along. We probably went out a couple of other times after that.
Yeah.
But 2 weeks after that weekend, I asked her to marry me. And she said, "Oh, okay." It was, but it was just, I knew.
Yeah.
And she did too, apparently.
Yeah, and she was like, "Yeah,
sure.
it's true."
Right,
and but it's like this,
yeah, and I don't
remember the truth.
Right, I can't remember, the exact words, but we were at my place. And we had been talking about something else, I don't remember the context, but because I said something like, "So, will you marry me?"
Wow.
Yeah. And she said, "Okay." but we knew, this was just meant to be, clearly. Yeah, and here you are.
Like within the flow of events, yeah, it had become illuminated,
Oh yeah,
and at that point it was like
yeah,
kind of a
right. And somewhere in there, in that 2-week period, I went
logical.
by her house. I was a rider then, so after work I rode to her house, and we went for a walk in Worth Park.
Mm.
And just to show you how goofy I was,
Okay.
we went for this walk, and I was in cleats, which are not made for walking at
'Cause you
all.
rode? 'Cause you rode
Yes.
your bike?
Right.
Oh.
So
You didn't have
I'm
a change of shoes, Dad?
clopping around. I didn't have any. I mean, I had shoes, but I think I could have left them at work because that didn't. I didn't usually stop off after after I got off.
Yeah, it wasn't in part of your
I wasn't
programming.
planning on that. Yeah. But if she wants to take a walk, we're taking a walk.
Yeah, yeah. Cleats.
Yeah, I don't know how I'm going to do
Barefoot,
this.
whatever.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, and I mean, I can't forget that walk because she, I guess has always forged her own path.
Yeah.
And so we took some shortcuts through the weeds and bushes, and me and these stupid cleats. And anyway, so I don't think my proposal was impromptu. I mean, it was something I had been thinking about and had accepted that I was going to do it.
Yeah.
But I had no plan
Yeah.
particularly.
Yeah.
It just seemed like the right time and place. So I did.
Yeah. But she knew.
Yeah, I knew. Yeah, it's probably the only time that's happened, when I just saw somebody and recognized that this is important here.
Yeah.
Something's going on, and so I should at least pay attention.
Bare minimum.
Right, I don't want to miss anything because this is likely to have consequences.
Yeah.
Tall consequences too.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm glad I asked.
Oh. Good. Yeah, me too. And I guess I thought you had heard that story, but I don't quite know why.
I mean, I've heard lower resolution
Oh.
versions of it,
Uh-huh.
but that's definitely been the most detail. Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for asking.
It's a damn good story.
Right. It was good enough for me.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. Yeah. Okay. I got what I needed.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That'll do.